Hello and welcome back. We are continuing the reading of the book Yamas and Niyamas by Deborah Adele. Today we will be reading the chapter of the first Yama, Ahimsa. This is on page 20. Ahimsa. Storms rage about me. I calm my heart and send out ribbons of peace, peace. Ahimsa, nonviolence. In the Karate Kid movies, Mr. Miyagi at first appears to be a silly, rather harmless little old man to 17-year-old Daniel. Mr. Miyagi is humble and unpretentious. He sits around for hours trying to catch flies with chopsticks, tends his bonsai trees, and doesn't even seem to bat an eye when provoked. But as the movie progresses and bullies threaten both Daniel and Mr. Miyagi springs into defensive action. Daniel's eyes are opened to the incredible ability of this old man who skillfully takes on a team of karate opponents larger and younger than he is. From that point on, Mr. Miyagi becomes Daniel's mentor in the art of skillful defense, true friendship, and the art of living. Nonviolence may appear to us like Mr. Miyagi first appeared to Daniel. It can look so passive and unimportant that we can easily ignore its presence and the subtleties of its power, wondering what the fuss is all about. And yet, in Eastern thought, nonviolence is so valued that it stands as the very core and foundation of all yoga philosophy and practice. It is as if the yogis are saying that if we don't ground our lives and actions in non-violence, everything else we attempt will be precarious. All of our achievements and successes, hopes and joys stand on faulty ground if they do not stand on the foundation built by non-violence. Killing and doing physical harm are grosser forms of nonviolence that are easily seen and understood. However, nonviolence has many subtle implications as well. When we feel hurried, afraid, powerless, out of balance, and harsh with ourselves, we may find ourselves speaking words of unkindness or even exploding with a violent outburst. As our awareness of these nuances grows, we learn that our ability to be nonviolent to others is directly related to our ability to be nonviolent within ourselves. Our inner strength and character determine our ability to be a person of peace at home and in the world. In the Karate Kid movies, Daniel did not go to karate school to study. Instead, he became skilled at karate by learning how to move through the daily chores of waxing cars, sanding wood, and painting fences. In much the same way, we grow our capacity to be nonviolent by learning how to move through the everyday challenges of life and by addressing the things that precipitate our tendencies toward violence. Ahimsa, or nonviolence, literally to do no harm, calls forth from us our most brilliant and best self. Our capacity to be nonviolent depends on our proactive practice of courage, balance, love of self, and compassion for others. Finding our courage. We only have to look around us to see that fear abounds. It abounds in cowardly faces that turn away, in violent attacks, in walls of protection, in bins of possessions, in numerous unkind words and gestures. In an abundant world, hoarders take more than their share, leaving others lacking. Wars are started and fought to seize the goods and keep the power. And around the world, children's innocence is destroyed by abuse and horror. If we look closely, we can trace all of these acts of greed, control, and insecurity back to their root, fear. Fear creates violence. If we are to begin to address these fears, we need to know the difference between the fears that keep us alive and the fears that keep us from living. The first kind of fear is instinctual and built in us for survival. The second kind of fear is fear of the unfamiliar. The unfamiliar can become an abundant place for our exploration once we realize this fear lives only in our imagination. It is only our minds that have created the turmoil in our gut and kept us hostage to the possibility of our own lives. An example of fear that lives only in the imagination might be skydiving. For me, the thought of jumping out of a plane at a high altitude and remembering to open my parachute somewhere along the way sends cold shivers down my spine and giant rumblings of fear in my gut. All of this is happening in my body in this very moment, and yet I have never experienced this activity. For me to walk into this fear, I would first imagine a different scenario for myself, something that looks like adventure and fun, something where I am competent and collected as I jump from heaven to earth. And then, where I really just step into my courage, I would call a pilot. Seeking out people and experiences we would normally avoid provides a fertile place to learn new things about ourselves and about life. Even those we might call enemies have much to teach us. People we have previously avoided will open up new ways of thinking and will give us pieces of ourselves. As we walk into our fears with both people and experiences, we will find that our sense of self has grown. Our view has expanded. The world suddenly looks like a bigger place, and we are more competent to navigate in it. As we expand ourselves into these new places, our minds and hearts grow more open, and we have less need to be violent. Thus, to create a life in a world free of violence is first and foremost to find our own courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to be afraid without being paralyzed. Courage is found by facing our fears, the small ones, the fat ones, the embarrassing ones, and the really big, scary ones. To live the fullness that our own life is inviting us into, we often have to let ourselves be afraid and do it anyway. If we keep ourselves safe, how will our courage grow? One of the reasons for Gandhi's unmatched power was that he continued to stay with life. He didn't run when life got too confusing or difficult. He stayed and learned from the moment, and in the process, he became a skillful leader no one could match and a force that no one could stop. For Gandhi, fear became a stimulus to develop his courage. Creating balance. Courage demands our best self, and that is a self in balance. Think about the times you are short with others because of too much work to do, or too much caffeine and sugar, or a restless night of sleep. Imbalance in our systems is almost a certainty for violence, as the dis-ease we feel within finds its way to expression outwards. Balance creates harmony within us, and harmony within naturally expresses itself in external actions that are harmonious. Dr. Phil Nornberger emphasizes the importance of balance when he says, "The deep harmony of balance is my most precious commodity, and I guard it fiercely." Creating balance in our lives is not an easy thing. We are hungry, noisy people bombarded with stimulation and advertisements that promise to grant us our deepest desires. If we are not on purpose with creating balance for ourselves, we can easily fall victim to false promises and fill every breathable space with appointments and activities and all the responsibilities that go with a full agenda. It is anti-cultural to claim any space that is simply space, or to move with any kind of lingering, or to take time for closure. We are bombarded and bombard ourselves. And if we have any doubts, our calendars will reveal the truth of our craziness. The repercussions are inescapable, immeasurable, violence to ourselves and those around us. Like the body, the mind and soul need time to digest and assimilate. Like the body, The mind and soul need time to rest. We create this rest by allowing space that we can breathe in. Not more clutter, but more space. Space to reflect, space to journal, space for closure, space for imagination, and space to feel the calling of life force within us. Balance does not look a certain way because it isn't a set standard to impose upon ourselves. It's not something we can plan or schedule. Balance instead comes from listening to the guidance and wisdom of the inner voice. Balance will look different in each of us, and even different in each of us at different times. To be in tune with ourselves, we must get quiet and listen, then heed this inner voice. This voice does not push or bombard or make promises. This inner wisdom simply knows what we need to be vital, healthy, and in deep harmony. My sons and their children love the board game Risk. It is a game where all the players begin with armies, which they strategically place on various countries around the world, and then try to conquer the world with their armies. It is a game of strategy and skill and can be played into the wee hours of the night. What is interesting to me is that my grandchildren, in playing this game, have learned something important about balance. One of my grandchildren put it this way: when you see someone's army spread all over the world, it looks so impressive. Dad always starts by putting all of his armies on 4 countries in a corner. It looks like no one will ever have to worry about him, but as the game gets played, the person who has spread their armies too thin is always the first to lose, and Dad always wins. Balance is like this. Spreading ourselves thin looks impressive, but in the end, we are the first to lose. The health and well-being of our body, mind, and spirit is a powerful resource, and by keeping ourselves in balance, we can stride through life with greater competence and ease. We are primed to win as we meet life from an inner place of harmony. When we are in balance, we automatically live in non-violence. Dealing with powerlessness. One of the biggest challenges to maintaining balance is feeling powerless. Feeling powerless leads to outward aggression in the form of frustration and anger, or withdrawal inward into depression and victimization. We fear our own power, and we often feel trapped at our sense of powerlessness. By powerless, I mean those times we feel like we've run out of choices. We've run out of options, and we are feeling totally incompetent to deal with the challenge at hand. At these times, we may feel like a caged animal, trapped and ready to spring. Whether we respond with anger, withdrawal, frustration, or resignation, there is a way in which our mind shuts down, as if we are riding a train through a dark tunnel and we can't see anything but darkness and anxiety. Ahimsa, or nonviolence, invites us to question the feeling of powerlessness rather than accept it. When we feel powerless, we have forgotten how much choice we really have. We have a choice to take action, and we have a choice to change the story we are telling ourselves about our powerlessness. Instead of sulking in the feeling of powerlessness, we can ask, what do I need to do right now to feel competent to handle this situation? During these times, we can also jumpstart ourselves by remembering past times when we successfully handled a challenging situation while remaining loving and whole, and then trying to find that feeling again. We have found 3 ways of thinking that shift me out of a feeling of powerlessness: practicing gratitude, trust in the moment, and thinking about others. When I change my approach, I am out of the dark tunnel of powerlessness. Suddenly, in the light, I see many options. For instance, if my car breaks down at an inconvenient time, I can choose to be grateful that I am safe and have my cell phone. I can choose one of many options for support for towing and fixing my car. I can turn the whole situation into an adventure by perhaps riding the bus for the first time in years, or calling an old friend for a lift, and trusting that somehow all is well. Often we carry a sense of powerlessness from a childhood story. Perhaps at one time in our lives the story was true, but it probably isn't true anymore. I do many private consultations with people who are feeling powerlessness from believing an old story that they have contained to accept as true. I have come to believe that any sense of powerlessness we are feeling can be traced back to the story we are telling ourselves in the moment about the situation. We all have the choice to tell a different story and grow ourselves up to take responsibility for our lives in a new and fresh way. Situations where we feel powerless can also be opportunities to grow and skill level with life. I find my powerless issues arise with technology and mechanics. When things break down, my feelings of powerlessness can become a violent outburst or an opportunity to learn something new. I often ponder the words of Yogi Raj Akala. I excite myself with my incompetencies. With this attitude, feelings of powerlessness become opportunities to become competent rather than violent. Self-love. Our ability to stay balanced and courageous has much to do with how we feel about ourselves. The following two stories illustrate this point. Pandit Rajmani Tigwane, spiritual head of the Himalayan Institute, tells of an incident with his young son. The family had just returned from India, and the child began behaving strangely. He was biting and pinching his parents and playmates. Rajmani was beside himself with this strange behavior from his sweet son, until he realized that in India his son had gotten worms, and the worms were pinching and biting his little insides. The son was only displaying outwardly the experience of his insides. Yoga instructor and mentor Anne Maxwell tells of the abrupt turbulence in her home when her 3-year-old son, Brooks, suddenly began holding his stools. Holding his stools caused him great discomfort. In turn, the whole household was affected to the extent that the day was shaped for the whole family by whether Brooks was releasing or holding his stools. The days he held it in were the days that the whole family suffered from the oppressive misery of a little 3-year-old boy. Brooks was displaying outwardly the experience of his insides. These stories show that how we treat ourselves is in truth how we treat those around us. If you are a taskmaster with yourself, others will feel your whip. If you are critical of yourself, others will feel your high expectations of themselves as well. If you are light-hearted and forgiving with yourself, others will feel the ease and joy of being with you. If you find laughter and delight in yourself, others will be healed in your presence. We would never purchase a can of red paint and expect it to be the color blue when applied to our walls. And yet we can be so harsh and demanding with ourselves and then expect to be loving with others. It just doesn't work that way. The color of the paint inside the can is the color that whatever we paint becomes. The color of how we treat ourselves is the color of how we treat others. If we can't be safe with ourselves, others can never be safe with us, and the world can never be safe, can never be a safe place to be. I spent 3 years consulting with a firm out of Boulder. The work itself was stimulating and rewarding, but I was on such a fast-paced track that one day I realized I had not even taken the time in those 3 years for one of my most delicious pleasures, a long hot bubble bath. When I finally took a pause to look at the whirlwind life I had created, I also realized I had not played with my grandchildren or checked in with my friends, and I was becoming quite demanding of those around me. Others were feeling my bite. I had created a violent inner world of pushing, overdoing, and undersleeping that had seeped into all of my relationships. When I quit work and began to bring some ease and pleasure back into my life, All of my relationships became more enjoyable and ease-filled. One experiment I did as I began to make this huge change was to practice falling in love with myself. I say experiment because I was curious what effect this would have on others as well as on me. Falling in love is such a delightful place. The other can do no wrong. The loved one is always beautiful and delightful to be with, and you want to be with them all the time. Falling in love leaves no room for the violence of expectations and judgments. It is free for delight and joy and spontaneity. Everyone around the lover also feels loved. Love creates a spontaneous combustion that includes all in its path. Have I succeeded in my experiment? Not entirely, but those who know me report that I am easy and delightful to be with. We can have hearts that are full of love for others and intentions to love that are pure, but the truth is, we will express that love for others by treating them the same way we treat ourselves. Love lies at the core of nonviolence and begins with our love of self. Not a love that is egocentric, but a love that is forgiving and lenient, a love that sees the humor in the imperfections and accepts the fullness of the human expression. Only when we find this love for all parts of ourselves can we begin to express fully the love that wells up inside of us for others. Finding this love for all the parts of ourselves means we have to forgive others. Without forgiveness, we carry guilt like a heavy burden around our hearts. Guilt holds our love for self and others hostage and keeps us bound to a one-sided expectation of the human experience. I cannot say this enough times. Our inability to love and accept all the pieces of ourselves creates ripples, tiny acts of violence that have huge and lasting impacts on others. To have in my life the privilege to hear many people speak their personal feelings, and I am constantly surprised by how much of their speech is reporting of failings and self-loathing in attempts to fix themselves. These attempts to change self rather than love self keep us trapped in vicious cycles that we can't crawl out of. There is such a big disconnect for me as I hear others share their personal confessions of failure. Even as I hear the words, I am seeing before me a beautiful, unique expression of the human being, and my heart is overwhelmed. And I find myself once again uttering my secret prayer that this person could someday see how magnificent they really are. Courage and love are deeply connected. When love became the Lord of my life, I became fearless. These words were expressed by Swami Rama in his journey on the earth and are echoed by Jesus' statement, "Perfect love casts out fear." Where fear creates harm and violence, love creates expansion and nonviolence and the true safety that we seek. Nonviolence is woven with love, and love of others is woven with love of self. These cannot be separated. Violence to others. If we cannot find love for ourselves, it becomes easy to look outward and begin to focus on others, hiding our own sense of failure and fear under our blazing concern for others. It's almost as if we are secretly saying, "My life is a mess. I'll feel better if I fix yours." If we are not honest with ourselves, we can even go to bed with a sense of pride in the amazing things we have done for others that day. We may even feel holy about our arduous feats of self-sacrifice. In reality, we are hiding our own sense of self-failure by telling others how to live their lives. When we are unwilling to look deeply and courageously into our own lives, we can easily violate others in many subtle ways that we may not even be aware of, thinking that we are actually helping them. Thinking we know what is better for others becomes a subtle way we do violence. When we take it upon ourselves to help the other, we whittle away at their sense of autonomy. Nonviolence asks us to trust the other's ability to find the answer they are seeking. It asks us to have faith in the other, not feel sorry for them. Nonviolence asks us to trust the other's journey and love and support others to their highest image of themselves, not our highest image of them. It asks that we stop managing ourselves, our experience, others, and others' experiences of us. Leave the other person free of our needs, free to be themselves, and free to see us as they choose. The violence we do to others by thinking we know what is best for them is dramatically illustrated in a story from India. It seems a passerby witnessed a monkey in a tree with a fish. The monkey was saying to the fish, "But I saved you from drowning." The monkey, thinking it had saved the fish, had taken the fish to a place that couldn't meet any of the fish's needs for survival or growth. We can't save people or fix them. All we can do is model, and that points the finger back at us. I experienced this well-intentioned help from my husband who, out of love for me, began to take anything heavy out of my arms and carry it himself. At first I thought this was sweet of him and appreciated the gesture, but over a period of time I began to notice that some of the strength was leaving my arms. By not occasionally carrying heavy things, I was getting weaker. Handling challenges gives each of us a sense of skill, self-esteem, and accomplishment. When we try to fix or save someone else, we are keeping them from getting the learning the situation has for them. Like the monkey in the story above, when we try to take someone out of their challenge or suffering, we take them out of the environment that offers them a rich learning experience. We are, in a sense, cutting them off from the power of growing stronger, more competent, and more compassionate. It can often feel like torture to let a person we care about sit in the suffering and challenges of their life. We almost can't help ourselves. If they are hurting, we want to make them feel better. If they have a decision to make, we want to tell them how to make it. And yet, the only thing we have to offer that is truly of value is to sit with them, where they are, as they are. We need to trust suffering and trust challenge and trust mistakes. They are what refine us when we don't run from them. Nell Morton, a feminist writer of the 70s, spoke eloquently about the power we have to hear each other into being. Rachel Naomi Remen echoes, "Our listening creates a sanctuary for the homeless parts within another person." There is nothing to fix or save in another. There is only the gift of listening. People need a safe place to hear themselves. To return to the monkey and the fish story, all we have to offer in the end is to get into the water with those in need, not to bring them into the tree with us. Worry is another way violence gets masked as caring. Worry is a lack of faith in the other and cannot exist simultaneously with love. Either we have faith in the other person to do their best, or we don't. Worry says, "I don't trust you to do your life right." Worry comes from a place of arrogance, that I know better what should be happening in your life. Worry says, "I don't trust your journey, or your answers, or your timing." Worry is fear that hasn't grown up yet. It is a misuse of our imagination. We both devalue and insult others when we worry about them. I'd like to discern the difference between help and support. For me, help carries the connotation that I am more skilled at life's decisions and challenges than the other person is. Help is a one-up on the other person, whereas support meets the other person on equal playing ground and equal ability and is able to sit with more awe and respect than answers. The Chrysalis Center for Battered Women in Minneapolis, Minnesota, has a beautiful motto that embodies the concept of trusting over worry and support over help. The motto states, "Every woman has her own answer. Every woman has her own timing. Every woman has her own path." It comes down to this. Do I go to my child, my friend, my partner, myself with love or with worry? Which has more breath, more space, more efficient use of energy, more building power? What would happen in the lives of others if we could choose love over worry and carry this kind of trust and belief in our loved ones? When we can truly love and accept all of ourself, compassion begins to blossom in our hearts, and we begin to see others with different eyes. Developing compassion. We learn compassion as we dissolve our personal version of the world and grow gentle eyes that are not afraid to see reality as it is. We learn compassion as we stop living in our heads, where we can neatly arrange things and ground ourselves in our bodies, where things might not be so neat. We learn compassion as we stop trying to change ourselves and others and choose instead to soften the boundaries that keep us separated from what we don't understand. We learn compassion as we do simple acts of kindness and allow others' lives to be as important as our own. When we begin to expand the boundaries of our heart, we can see clearly to act in ways that truly make a difference. Compassion is a clear response to the need of the moment. We see this truth lived out in the lives of the great ones. They act with compassion and skill that truly changes things. In the New Testament, the Greek word that gets translated into compassion is this word right here. I'm not even going to try to say it. This word literally means to have feelings in the bowels or other inward parts. We tend to think of the heart as the place of compassion, but in Jesus' day, emotions were understood to be centered in one's bowels. Because compassion was understood to carry a very visceral, gut-wrenching inner reaction, it was used sparingly by the New Testament gospel writers. When the gospel writers did use this word, it was to portray a person that was touched so deeply and profoundly by the situation of another that they were moved to take immediate action on behalf of the one who was suffering. These gospel writers understood compassion to be more than a sorrowful feeling. It was a powerful inner response leading to an immediate outward action that took a risk on behalf of the other. A friend tells of an incident that happened to her many years ago. A woman with a new baby from the apartment next door began frantically screaming that her husband had locked himself in the bathroom and was killing himself. My friend, after dialing 911, broke all of the rules of keeping herself from danger by somehow getting into the bathroom and beginning to hold this man who was by now lying on the floor bleeding profusely. My friend risked all precautions to soothe and comfort this man as they both waited for help to come. Compassion is like this. It moves us across the boundaries of established norms and often past the boundaries of safety, rushing headlong to do what it can to ease another's suffering. Compassion forgets itself in the standards of protocol to answer the cries of another. We may not yet have the kind of courage and depth of compassion that my friend displayed, but we can, in all of our encounters, begin to practice acts of kindness. When my husband was 11, his dad was killed in a car accident, leaving 7 small children and a stunned wife behind. My husband continues to tenderly tell and retell how one of his uncles began to periodically stop by the house, coaxing himself and his siblings into the backyard for a game of softball, taking them to their first Viking football game, and on the best of snow days, driving them to a secluded road with a fabulous hill. From there, the uncle would haul them in his station wagon up the hill so they could ride their sleds down that hill, only to repeat the action again and again. Seeing 7 bewildered nieces and nephews, whose father had been suddenly killed, this uncle had compassion. No one had asked him for anything. This uncle, moved by a visceral gut feeling, took unsolicited action on behalf of the whole family. It made all the difference for my husband. Lucille Clifton once said, "Every pair of eyes facing you has probably experienced something you could not endure. Every human being walking this earth has painful stories tucked in the corners of their hearts. If we could remember this truth, perhaps we could see the eyes of compassion rather than the eyes of our own judgments and preferences." While attending a workshop at SLN, I met a man from Tokyo who epitomized the compassion and gentleness of nonviolence. He had a certain light about him, and I observed that others were as attracted to him as I was. I was delighted one afternoon to find myself in his company during lunch and being privileged to hear his story. He had been on the fast track in Japan, an entrepreneur of great talent and dedication, moving up the success ladder at a rapid pace. In one swift moment, his life changed when his best friend, who had been paralleling this life of high success, suddenly dropped dead of a heart attack. I sat mesmerized at this man across from me at the table, spoke in low and certain notes that at the moment he saw his life unfold before him and instantly retired from business to begin running marathons. More incredibly, he had never trained. He just began to run for the love of running and for the love of life. Now in his late 40s, he has been running a marathon a week for the past 5 years. To look at him, I had to marvel because he had a stocky build with bowed legs. And yet, he had never suffered even the slightest injury. He flew all over the world to run a marathon a weekend, and that was his training. When asked how he accomplished this kind of stamina with no injury or training, he reverently replied, "With each step I touch the earth lightly to do her no harm, and she in turn does me no harm." Whatever we find ourselves engaged in, this jewel of ahimsa or nonviolence asks us to step lightly, do no harm, and to honor the relationship we have with the earth, with each other, and with ourselves. This is the end of the chapter for Ahimsa. At the end of each chapter are questions for exploration. And you're welcome to take a screenshot of this if you would like to read and answer the questions, if you're keeping a journal along the way, the reading of this book. I hope you have a wonderful day or a wonderful evening. And until next time, please take care of yourself. And we will start with Satya in the next video. Namaste.